He looked right at me, smiled at his friends, and said it loud enough for the whole room to hear.
Relax, Emma. Stop acting like my wife.
The room exploded with laughter. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply said, okay. Then I picked up my keys and walked straight out the door. And the second that door clicked shut behind me, his smile completely disappeared. If this kind of story hits close to home for you, like this video right now before you keep watching, because what I'm about to tell you is something a lot of people need to hear. And if you've ever been disrespected by someone you genuinely loved, stay until the very end. This one is for you. My name is Emma Carter, and I'm 30 years old. I work as a project coordinator at a mid-sized construction company. It's not a title anyone puts on a vision board. Nobody grows up dreaming about coordinating permits and managing contractor timelines. But the job is steady, it pays well, and honestly, it suits me perfectly because I am the kind of person who keeps things running smoothly behind the scenes without ever needing applause for it. I grew up in a modest household where my parents didn't have much money, but they had something more valuable than money. They had principles. Loyalty was not optional in my home. Respect was not negotiable. You showed up for people who showed up for you. You kept your word. You treated people the way you wanted to be treated. Those values weren't written on a wall anywhere. They were just lived every single day, and they attached themselves to me permanently. By the time I was an adult, I had become the responsible one in every circle I belonged to. In friendships, I was the one who remembered birthdays, who checked in after hard weeks, who showed up with food when someone was sick. At work, I was the one who caught the details others missed. And in relationships, I was the planner, the supporter, the person who held the logistics of two people's lives together while somehow making it look effortless. Then I met Ryan. Ryan was magnetic in social situations. That's the only word that fits. He walked into rooms and people turned toward him like plants leaning into sunlight. He was funny, he was loud in the best way, and he had a gift for making everyone around him feel like they were part of something entertaining. I genuinely admired that about him in the beginning. Charisma is rare. I was drawn to it. What I failed to notice, or maybe what I noticed but chose to minimize, was the quiet imbalance that formed from almost the very beginning of our relationship. Ryan was exceptional at being present when presence felt good. He showed up to fun things. He was charming at dinners and engaging at parties. But the work of a relationship, the real, unglamorous machinery of it, fell almost entirely on my shoulders without any discussion or negotiation. I handled the bills we shared. I planned every trip we took together. I tracked the appointments, managed the conflicts in our schedules, provided emotional support during his difficult weeks, and cooked more meals in his apartment than I ever cooked in my own. And I told myself that this was love. I genuinely believed that being supportive meant being patient, that carrying more weight was just what you did when you cared about someone. People who encountered me described me as easygoing, calm, not the type to stir things up. I wasn't rich, I wasn't flashy, I didn't command attention when I walked into a room the way Ryan did, but I had something that no one in his circle ever thought to look for. I had a sharp mind and a memory that didn't let things go quietly. The night Ryan decided to make me the punchline of his performance for his friends was the night that sharp mind finally found its purpose. Before I go any further into this story, I need to stop and ask you something directly. Have you ever stayed quiet in a relationship because you convinced yourself that patience was the same thing as love? If that question just landed somewhere uncomfortable inside you, like this video right now. Do it before you forget, because you'll want to come back to this. And if you've ever been disrespected by someone you genuinely loved, stay until the very end. This one is for you. Drop a comment below right now. Tell me the moment you first realized that someone didn't see your worth. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this one. There are thousands of people watching this right now who have felt exactly what you felt. You are not alone in it. Now, let me tell you exactly what Ryan did and exactly what happened after. It was a Friday evening in early autumn. One of Ryan's closest friends, a guy named Derek, was hosting a small, casual get-together at his apartment. Nothing formal, just a group of friends, some drinks, some music playing in the background, and the kind of easy conversation that happens when people are comfortable with each other. Ryan mentioned it to me 2 days before, and I said I'd come. Simple enough. But I didn't just show up. I spent 2 hours that afternoon in my kitchen cooking. I made a full spread, enough food for everyone there, packed it carefully into containers, and carried it over because that was just the kind of person I was. That was how I participated. I contributed. I showed care through action. When we arrived, while Ryan immediately found his spot in the center of the living room and launched into a story that had 3 people already laughing before he'd even reached the point, I went to the kitchen. I arranged the food, I found plates, I wiped down the counter that had some spilled drink on it. I made sure everything was accessible for people who wanted to eat, and I did all of this without being asked, without expecting acknowledgement, because it felt natural to me. Then, Ryan's friend Travis, relaxed and grinning from the couch, called out over toward the kitchen, "Man, Danielle keeps this whole operation running. You better lock that down before someone smarter than you figures out what he's got." It was meant to be complimentary. I think Travis genuinely meant it it well, but what happened next was not well-meaning. Ryan looked at me, then he looked at the group. He did that thing he did when he wanted an audience reaction, that slight pause before the punchline, and then he laughed and said it loud and clear. "Relax, Danielle. Stop acting like my wife." The room exploded with laughter. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply said, "Okay." Then I picked up my keys and walked straight out the door. And the second that door clicked shut behind me, his smile completely disappeared. I didn't reply to Ryan's text. I didn't pick up his calls. And when we ran into each other in a group chat, I was polite, but woefully brief. I began unplugging my life from his. Ryan did not apologize. What he did instead told me everything I needed to understand about his character. He began telling mutual friends that I was too sensitive. He made comments in group conversations suggesting I was trying to lock him down, framing the whole situation as me being the difficult one. A mutual friend named Priya, who had always been decent to me, texted me privately to let me know what was being said. She felt uncomfortable with it. She thought I deserved to hear it directly. The sting of that was different from the party. At the party, he had humiliated me in the moment. Behind my back, he was rewriting the story to protect himself. That was a different kind of betrayal, colder, more deliberate. Then I looked at my finances. I sat down with my bank statements and the notes I had been keeping casually on my phone over the past several months, a habit I had developed without fully realizing why. The numbers were not balanced. They were not even close to balanced. The shared dinners, the weekend trips I had organized and largely funded, the groceries I bought for evenings I cooked at his apartment, the small, consistent expenses that had accumulated without comment. When I added it up and brought it to Ryan, calmly and without accusation, his response was a shrug. "You make good money. Why does it even matter?" "It matters because you never once acknowledged it. It matters because you accepted it like it was owed to you. That is why it matters." A few weeks after the party, at another social gathering, Ryan introduced me to someone new. He gestured casually in my direction and said with a grin, "This is Danielle, my unofficial life manager." More laughter. Same energy. Same.
I stopped raising my voice with Ryan entirely. I became still and watchful. I noticed how frequently he mentioned things in conversation that I had actually organized, planned, or executed without a single reference to my involvement. I noticed how his confidence around me grew the more I stayed quiet. He interpreted my silence as surrender. He assumed my patience was bottomless. It wasn't. It was a record being kept. There was something Ryan had no knowledge of, something I had never discussed with him because he had made it clear early on that he found the whole concept embarrassing. Years before Ryan, when I was recovering from a different relationship that had taken more from me than I had understood at the time, I started writing. I created a blog under a pseudonym. The focus was relationships, specifically the invisible work that one person absorbs while the other person moves freely. The erosion of self-respect that happens so gradually you don't notice it until you're already half gone. The importance of emotional boundaries and what it costs when you abandon them for someone else's comfort. I never advertised it aggressively. I just wrote with honesty and consistency, and people found it. Slowly at first, then steadily, then in large numbers, tens of thousands of regular readers, a comment section full of people saying they had never seen their own experience described so accurately before. My readers trusted me because I never performed for them. I wrote the truth and I let it stand on its own. Ryan used to mock people who shared personal things online. He called it desperate, people broadcasting their private lives for strangers to consume. He had no idea that his girlfriend had been doing exactly that for years. He had no idea that her audience already numbered in the tens of thousands and was still growing. After the party, after the financial review, after the second public introduction as his unofficial life manager, I opened my laptop and began drafting a new post. I wrote about the experience of cooking for someone's friends and being used as a punchline for it. I wrote about what it feels like to have your consistency treated as a character flaw. I wrote about emotional labor that goes unnamed and therefore goes unvalued. I wrote about the specific loneliness of being with someone who depends on you privately but dismisses you publicly. I wrote in my draft, what Ryan didn't know was that thousands of people were already listening to my voice. There was something Ryan had no knowledge of, something I had never discussed with him because he had made it clear early on that he found the whole concept embarrassing. Years before Ryan, when I was recovering from a different relationship that had taken more from me than I had understood at the time, I started writing. I created a blog under a pseudonym. The focus was relationships, specifically the invisible work that one person absorbs while the other person moves freely. The erosion of self-respect that happens so gradually you don't notice it until you're already half gone. The importance of emotional boundaries and what it costs when you abandon them for someone else's comfort. I never advertised it aggressively. I just wrote with honesty and consistency, and people found it. Slowly at first, then steadily, then in large numbers, tens of thousands of regular readers, a comment section full of people saying they had never seen their own experience described so accurately before. My readers trusted me because I never performed for them. I wrote the truth and I let it stand on its own. Ryan used to mock people who shared personal things online. He called it desperate, people broadcasting their private lives for strangers to consume. He had no idea that his girlfriend had been doing exactly that for years. He had no idea that her audience already numbered in the tens of thousands and was still growing. After the party, after the financial review, after the second public introduction as his unofficial life manager, I opened my my laptop and began drafting a new post. I wrote about the experience of cooking for someone's friends and being used as a punchline for it. I wrote about what it feels like to have your consistency treated as a character flaw. I wrote about emotional labor that goes unnamed and therefore goes unvalued. I wrote about the specific loneliness of being with someone who depends on you privately but dismisses you publicly. I wrote in my draft, what Ryan didn't know was that thousands of people were already listening to my voice. I called Megan on a Tuesday night. Megan has been my closest friend since we were 15 years old. She knew me before I had learned the habit of making myself smaller. She listened to the entire story without interrupting once, which is one of the reasons she remains the person I trust most in the world. When I finished, she was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, Danielle, you have spent years supporting this man. What exactly has he done for you in return? I opened my mouth to answer and found that I couldn't produce a clean one. That silence was its own answer. Megan didn't push me toward drama. That was never her style. But she helped me see the relationship without the layer of hope and habit I had been filtering it through for too long. She said plainly, you keep protecting his image. He is not protecting yours. That's not balance. That's not love. Meanwhile, Ryan continued operating as though everything was essentially fine. He texted with normal frequency. He made plans for the coming weekend. He told a mutual friend I was the most easygoing girl he'd ever been with, which I found almost darkly funny given what I was preparing to publish. The blog post was nearly finished. I hesitated not because I feared Ryan's reaction, but because I understood that publishing was a door that only opened in one direction. Once it was out, it was permanent. I held the draft for several days. Megan called the night before I decided to post it. She asked, are you going to do it? I said, yes, and saying it out loud made it real. She said, good. Telling the truth is not revenge, Danielle. It's clarity. I slept better that night than I had in months. The post went live on a Thursday morning. I titled it, The Night Someone Told Me to Stop Acting Like His Wife. I wrote about the party. I wrote about the serving spoon and the laughter and the single word I said before I picked up my keys and left. I wrote about the financial imbalance and the behind-the-back narratives and the way a man can use a woman's reliability as crowd entertainment while she stands there holding the food he cooked for his friends. I wrote about emotional labor, about care that gets absorbed without acknowledgement, about the slow and quiet cost of loving someone who treats your effort as a baseline expectation rather than a gift. I did not use Ryan's real name. I didn't need to. The behavior was specific enough to be real and universal enough to reach anyone who had ever lived inside a similar dynamic. By midday, the post had thousands of shares. By evening, it had crossed into major online communities focused on relationships and self-worth. Comment sections filled with people saying they had read their own life in my words. People who had never commented on anything before were writing paragraphs. Relationship writers and podcasters were referencing it. Then, on Friday evening, a member of Ryan's friend group sent the article link to their group chat. His message was 4 words. Dude, is this Danielle? Ryan called me that night. I let it ring. He called a second time. On the third call, I picked up. Did you write that? His voice was tight in a way I hadn't heard before. Yes, I said. He was furious. He said I had betrayed him. He said I had humiliated him publicly. He demanded I remove the post immediately. The words came fast and the anger behind them was real, but through all of it, I noticed one thing clearly. He never once said, I'm sorry for what I said that night. Not once. I told him, you said I wasn't your wife, so I stopped acting like it. The friends who had laughed at that party were now sitting inside comment sections where thousands of strangers were analyzing the exact behavior they had participated in and found so entertaining. The social ease of that laughter had evaporated. Travis said nothing publicly. The room that had erupted was now very quiet. Ryan told me again to delete the post. I told him the conversation about the post was finished. And then I told him the relationship was finished too. All of it. Completely. He understood in that moment that a throwaway joke delivered in 30 seconds for an easy laugh had just become a permanent and widely read document about the real cost of public disrespect. I found my own apartment 2 weeks later. First floor, big windows, quiet street. It smelled like fresh paint when I walked through it for the first time, and I signed the lease the same afternoon. Moving my things out of the shared spaces Ryan and I had occupied felt less like grief and more like reclaiming territory I hadn't realized I'd surrendered. The blog kept growing. My story found people in places I hadn't anticipated. The comment section became its own community. Thousands of people sharing their versions of that party, that dismissal, that precise moment when someone they loved turned their care into a performance for an audience. I read every comment I could reach. I responded to as many as my time allowed. Ryan reached out multiple times over the following weeks. I didn't respond to any of it, not from bitterness, but because there was genuinely nothing left to work with. Some of his friends contacted me separately. Jordan, who had always been one of the more decent people in that group, sent a message apologizing for laughing that night. I thanked him sincerely because the ability to reflect is not nothing. I had spent a long time making myself quieter, smaller, more agreeable to preserve a peace that only ever served one person. I had confused endurance with devotion and absorbed that confusion deep enough that I nearly forgot what I actually valued about myself. Ryan's joke, careless and performative and crowd-seeking, had accidentally done something he never intended. It had made everything undeniably clear. I didn't need his ring to know my value. I just needed to stop pretending his comfort was worth my dignity.
The night he told me to stop acting like his wife was the night I finally started acting like myself. If you have ever been embarrassed or dismissed or made smaller by someone you genuinely loved and supported, I want to hear from you right now. Leave your story in the comments. Tell me the moment you recognized your own worth, because that moment is everything. That moment is where it turns. You deserve to be with someone who sees your effort as something precious, not as material for a joke. Subscribe to this channel. Every story we share here belongs to someone who stopped shrinking and started standing. Click hype to send this story to someone out there right now who needs to hear it today. Thank you for staying until the end of this. It genuinely means something. If any part of Danielle's story felt familiar to you, if you have had your own turning point, your own moment of clarity, share it below. Your words in that comment section might be the exact thing that helps someone else find their courage. Subscribe so you never miss a story here, and click hype to pass this one forward to someone who needs the reminder that their patience has value, their effort has value, and they have every right to finally put themselves first.